Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're going to tackle some super important ecological concepts.
Yeah, definitely key stuff for you, AP environmental science students.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're talking about how species interact, how they adapt.
Basically, how they fit into their environments. Like, what's their role?
Totally. And thinking about ecosystems as a whole,
Yeah.
not just individual species.
Right, right. It's all connected, like in this big web we call the biosphere.
Earth's ultimate VIP club for every living thing.
Okay.
But before we get too ahead of ourselves, we got to define what actually makes an ecosystem.
You got it. Just like your school has boundaries. Walls, fences, all that.
Rules, don't forget the rules.
No, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So ecosystems, they have limits too. And these boundaries, they're set by both living and non-living factors.
Right. Biotic and abiotic, as you science folks say.
Exactly. The living stuff like plants and animals, those are your biotic factors.
Yeah, and the non-living.
Well, think about things like temperature, sunlight, even rocks. Those are your abiotic factors.
Gotcha. So it's like this mix of the living and non-living that makes each ecosystem unique, right?
Exactly. And remember, even though we often study them separately, these ecosystems, they're all interconnected.
How so?
Think about it. What happens in one ecosystem can totally affect another, like even if they're far apart.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Give me an example.
Let's say a huge wildfire rips through a forest.
Okay. Devastating, but I'm following.
Well, that fire, it could impact air quality in a nearby city.
Right. Smoke and stuff.
Exactly. And that changes the abiotic conditions in that urban ecosystem. See? It's all connected.
Like a domino effect. Okay, now things get even more intense when we bring limited resources into the picture.
Oh, yeah, that's when competition kicks in.
Right. Like not enough pizza to go around in the cafeteria.
Uh-huh, exactly. When resources are scarce, species have to compete for survival.
Survival of the fittest.
Yep, pretty much. There's this classic experiment by a scientist named Gauss.
Oh, yeah, I remember learning about this. He was studying, what was it, microorganisms?
Yep. And he found that if two species need the same limited resource, they can't coexist forever. Like, one will always win out.
So it's a battle for the last slice of pizza.
Oh.
But doesn't nature have a way of, like, working things out?
Well, over time, species have evolved ways to avoid total annihilation from competition.
Like what?
One strategy is resource partitioning. It's like nature's way of saying, hey, let's share.
Resource partitioning. Okay, break that down for me.
Imagine your school cafeteria had assigned lunch periods.
To avoid everyone rushing the pizza line at once.
Exactly. That's resource partitioning in action. Species evolved to use resources in different ways, or at different times.
Ah, so they find their niche.
Exactly, like Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands.
Yeah.
Different beak shapes for different types of seeds everyone gets to eat.
That's amazing. So competition actually drives diversity.
You got it. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about a more, shall we say, dramatic side of species interactions, predator versus prey.
The classic chase scene like lions and zebras.
Exactly. Predation is a huge force in shaping ecosystems. It's not just about who eats who, though.
What else is there to it?
Well, it impacts population sizes, drives evolutionary adaptations, even shapes habitats.
Okay, so it's a lot more than just a lion taking down a zebra. What are some other examples of predation?
Well, think about parasitoids. They're kind of like a mix between predators and parasites.
A bit of a combo deal.
Right, like parasitic wasps, for example.
What do?
They lay their eggs inside an aphid. When the wasp larvae hatch, they basically eat the aphid from the inside out.
Oh, that's pretty gruesome.
Yeah, not very Disney-friendly, haha. So, with all these predators and parasitoids lurking about, you might wonder, how do prey species even survive?
Yeah, good point.
Well, they've got some pretty cool adaptations, camouflage, spines, even mimicking dangerous species.
So they've evolved ways to avoid becoming lunch.
Exactly. It's like an ongoing arms race, constantly pushing each other to adapt.
It's incredible how natural selection works. But hold on, not all consumption means instant death, right? What about those organisms that, well, they take their time with their meals?
You're thinking about parasites. They live on or in a host, getting nutrients without killing it right away.
Sleeky.
Right. They might steal resources, weaken the host, even manipulate its behavior.
Wow, mind control. And there's also, what about those animals that feast on plants?
Herbivores, yeah, they play a critical role too. They can influence plant diversity, regulate growth, even change the physical structure of habitats.
So even something as seemingly simple as eating plants can have a big impact.
Totally. And remember, all these interactions, they're not static. A change in one population can ripple through the whole ecosystem.
So it's like that giant web we talked about earlier.
Exactly. But hey, before we get too caught up in the competitive side of things, remember, there's also cooperation and mutual benefit happening out there.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom.
Definitely not. And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
Ooh, can't wait. This is getting good. Okay, so before we jumped into this next part, we were talking about all the competition in ecosystems.
Yeah, like predator versus prey, all that.
But nature's not always a battle royale, right? There's got to be some teamwork happening, too.
Absolutely. It's easy to focus on those dramatic interactions, but some of the coolest stuff in nature involves cooperation.
Like species helping each other out.
Exactly. It's a win-win situation. We call it mutualism.
Mutualism.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
so both species benefit from the relationship.
Yep, like a perfect study buddy situation. You both ace the exam.
I like that analogy. What are some examples of mutualism out in the wild?
Well, think about plants and their pollinators.
Oh, wow.
Bees buzzing around, collecting nectar.
And spreading pollen as they go.
Right. The bees get a sugary snack, and the plants get help with reproduction.
It's like a perfect exchange of services. But it's not just bees and flowers, right?
Nope. Mutualism is everywhere. Take coral and algae, for instance.
Those colorful reefs.
Yep. Tiny algae live inside the coral's tissues, providing them with sugars from photosynthesis.
And in return,
The coral provides the algae with a safe and stable environment.
like a little underwater apartment complex.
Exactly. The coral provides the rooms, and the algae pay the rent with sugary snacks.
I love that. What are some other examples? I bet there's some pretty cool ones.
Oh, tons. Think about cleaner fish and larger fish. The cleaner fish set up these little cleaning stations.
It's like an underwater car wash.
Haha, yeah. They remove parasites and dead skin from the larger fish.
So the cleaner fish get a meal, and the bigger fish get a spa day.
Everyone wins. Now, there's another type of interaction where one species benefits, but the other isn't really affected.
Like no harm, no foul.
Exactly. It's called commensalism.
Commensalism.
Okay.
Okay. Got an example for that one.
Sure. Think about those little fish that hang out in your sharks.
Feeding on scraps from the shark's meals.
Right. They get a free meal and protection, and the shark doesn't really care.
So the fish benefit, and the shark is just like, whatever.
Pretty much. It's like having a built-in snack disposal system.
Uh-huh. Nice. What else? Any other examples of commensalism?
Well, birds building nests in trees is a classic example. Birds get a safe place to raise their young, and the tree isn't really harmed or helped.
Just providing a little real estate.
Exactly. Okay, so we've covered competition, predation, parasitism, mutualism, and commensalism.
Wow, that's a lot of ways species can interact. It's like a whole soap opera playing out in nature.
Yeah. But what happens when a new character enters the scene, like a species that wasn't originally part of that ecosystem?
Ooh, that sounds like trouble.
It can be. We're talking about invasive species.
Invasive species. Okay, so these are species that, they just show up uninvited?
Well, sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally. But the key is they're not from around here.
Like they're not native to that ecosystem.
Right. Native species, they've evolved and adapted to that specific environment over time.
They're the original cast members.
Exactly. But these exotic or alien species, they can sometimes cause problems.
Like what kind of problems?
Well, some become invasive, meaning they spread rapidly and harm the native ecosystem.
Why do they become invasive?
Often it's because they don't have natural predators or competitors in their new environment.
So they can just take over.
Pretty much. They can outcompete native species, prey on them, introduce diseases. It can really disrupt the balance.
How do these invasive species even get to new places in the first place?
Human activities play a big role. Think about global trade and travel.
Right. Ships, planes, all that.
Exactly. Ships can carry organisms in ballast water. Planes can transport insects and seeds.
Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes accidental.
Yep, like people might introduce a species for hunting or as an ornamental plant, and then, whoops, it takes over.
But a souvenir that turns out to be a real pain.
Haha, good analogy. One example is honeybees in North America. They're not native here, but they were brought over by European colonists.
So they're considered invasive.
Well, they're important for pollination, but they also compete with native pollinators.
So even something seemingly beneficial can have unintended consequences.
Exactly. It's all about understanding the complexity of these relationships. And speaking of invasive species with big impacts, let's talk about the red fox.
What about it?
Well, it was introduced to Australia for hunting, and it's had a devastating impact on many native animals.
It's crazy how one species can cause so much disruption. It really makes you think about the importance of protecting biodiversity.
Absolutely. Invasive species are a prime example of how human actions can disrupt ecological balance.
Okay, so we've learned about all these different ways species interact, and now we've got invasive species thrown into the mix.
It's a lot to take in, but for you AP environmental science students out there, it's crucial to understand these concepts.
For sure. Any key takeaways about invasive species that they should remember?
Well, first, know the difference between native, exotic, and invasive species. And remember, invasive species are the ones causing harm.
Usually because they don't have those natural checks and balances in their new environment.
Right. And importantly, human actions are often responsible for spreading them.
So we need to be more careful about what we transport and introduce to new areas.
Exactly. We have a responsibility to protect biodiversity and maintain that ecological balance.
It's crazy to think about invasive species just like popping up in your backyard.
Right. And the thing is, they can really mess things up.
Yeah, we were talking about all those ecological relationships.
Right. The food webs, the habitats.
Invasive species can disrupt all of that, right?
Absolutely. They can even drive native species to extinction.
It's like a domino effect. One change leads to another and another.
Exactly. Think about, let's say an invasive plant takes over a field.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
It outcompetes the native plants for sunlight, water, nutrients, all that.
So the native plants start to disappear,
Right, and that means less food and shelter for native insects.
which then affects the birds that eat those insects.
Exactly. It's like pulling a thread on a sweater.
The whole thing unravels. And I bet these impacts go beyond just the ecosystem itself.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There can be economic consequences, too.
In what way?
Well, think about invasive insects that damage crops, or invasive plants that clog waterways.
That would definitely cost a lot of money to deal with.
Absolutely. We're talking billions of dollars to control and manage these invasive species.
It's kind of scary how much damage one species can cause, especially when it's not even supposed to be there.
It really highlights the importance of understanding ecology and applying that knowledge to conservation.
Right. We need to be proactive in preventing the spread of these invasive species.
Absolutely. We got to be careful about what we transport across borders.
And even think about the plants we're growing in our own gardens.
Right. And little things like cleaning our hiking boots so we don't spread seeds.
Every little bit helps, right? Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have, from competition to predation to those crazy invasive species.
It's amazing how much there is to learn about how species interact and adapt.
And for all you AP environmental science students out there, I hope this deep dive has helped you understand these concepts better.
For sure. But remember, it's not just about memorizing definitions for a test
It's about understanding the connections between all living things.
and appreciating the delicate balance of our ecosystems.
Exactly. So keep exploring, stay curious, and remember, ecology is happening all around you every day.
Well said. That's all the time we have for today, but we'll catch you in our next deep dive.